In the right, or wrong if you prefer, minds, any ideology can be taken to an extreme. I think most people are familiar with some forms of extremists, whether through religion or political views. Some obvious examples that may come to mind include terrorist organizations, but even someone maintaining peaceful advocacy may go to an extreme. So what's an extremist? Quite simply, an extremist is someone who holds or advocates extreme views. Usually these are political or religious views, and often an extremist will advocate for things that are illegal or even violent. At the very least, the views or advocacy is something outside of what is considered normal and acceptable. This extreme is generally even beyond what others who agree with some underlying principles would accept. An example of an extremist would be someone who believes the U.S. should become a straight-up theocracy of any kind. While they may or may not actually advocate violence or law-breaking, this is a position well beyond what normal people, even religious people, would consider a viable stance. A strawman, on the other hand, is where you set up a more easily knocked-down version of your opponent's argument. This allows you to counter something less substantial than what they've really said, appearing to win without ever actually addressing the position they hold. Typically, strawman refers to this being done intentionally, but that said, there are many ways to accidentally wind up doing this, and it's difficult if not impossible to tell between them. A hypothetical example would be, let's say that Joe argues that the Westboro Baptist Church is a hate group and they should be opposed. Then his friend Tom replies, "Religion does a lot of good in the world! How can you say we should eliminate all religion?" This is obviously not what was said. Arguing that one specific church should be opposed isn't saying that all religion must be opposed, let alone eliminated. So first, where do these things overlap? Simply put, many, I'd venture to guess most, strawmen, even accidental ones, are created from the extremist form of something. Strawmen often wind up putting someone in a position of either clarifying what they weren't actually saying or defending a position they don't actually hold. The fact that they don't hold that position, however, doesn't mean that nobody does. In fact, they are often positions that someone does hold. The person using a strawman pretends to knock down what hasn't actually been addressed, but the same argument may be perfectly valid if used against the actual extreme position mentioned. At the same time, people tend to assume, unless you explicitly state otherwise, that an argument is representing or refuting the normal case. One place I've seen a lot of this confusion is when it comes to the not all arguments. Whether we're discussing not all men, not all Muslims, or whatever other groups, it can wind up being either of these situations. If it's a response to a specific person criticizing some part of the group, then it may well be a strawman. If it's in response to frustration with people who make universal claims, it's probably arguing against extremists. If it's against everyone who holds a general idea in common, for example, the idea that Islam needs to be countered, we're back at strawman. Unfortunately, arguing against extremists can often be misunderstood as arguing against the more general positions. This is a problem made worse by muddied terms and limited exposure to the reasonable opposition that exists. Without clarifying that you're discussing specifically a subgroup that says or does a certain thing, or a specific case, people may assume that you mean to argue or counter the more moderate position. Similarly, they may assume that you think the extreme position is the most common or all that exists. Then you may both be talking past each other, essentially fighting strawmen instead of having any kind of reasonable discussion. But what do you think? When do you think that arguing against extremists turns into fighting a strawman? What do you think sets these two things apart?